Hi everyone, it's Thursday. You're watching CBC News BC. I'm Vineet Brach here in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Let's get to your top stories today. Well, 8 years into BC's toxic drug crisis, more than 14,500 lives have been lost. Now, that's according to the latest figures released by the BC Coroner Service. In April, unregulated toxic drugs claimed the lives of 182 people in BC. The coroner says while this is a 24% decrease since last April last year, the risks from the unregulated drug supply are still very high. About 6 people die from toxic drugs a day in BC. And police have also identified the victim of yesterday's stabbing, homicide, as a 32-year-old Wataru Kakiyuchi. The Burnaby resident was found injured in Union and Main Street just before 3:30 a.m. on Wednesday. He had been stabbed and died before he could have been taken to hospital. Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim commented recently and says this was a senseless act of violence. He says Wataru was a talented chef, a positive presence, and cherished friend to many. And police are still looking for evidence that will lead to the arrest of the person who was responsible for the killing. No motive has been determined so far. And today, the search also goes on to find 3 climbers who went missing in Garibaldi Park last week. Teams are in the air, they're on the ground, they have avalanche search dogs and drones. And with the weather clearing up, search and rescue crews were able to survey the area near Atwell Peak yesterday. And it is very difficult terrain, and that's where the trio was headed before they lost contact. As this continues, the public is again being reminded to stay out of that area. And 80 years ago today, Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy to liberate France from Nazi Germany in World War II. To honor Canadian soldiers, one Coquitlam man is walking 80 kilometers in 20 hours.
So what I've decided to do is I've known quite a few war veterans, and unfortunately they've all passed away. And I've known many that actually fought in the D-Day battle, Normandy campaign to liberate France. So I'm going to walk for them. It means a lot because this really became a personal thing, commemoration. From me to people that I knew, the veterans who have passed away. There's no fanfare, there's no send-off ceremony, no welcome when I finish downtown, but I'm doing it with my son. So I don't think I could do it any better than that. And it really is a solemn walk. And I'll be thinking about these guys when I'm walking.
I'm the support driver for the event, so I've got all of his stuff in there, water, food, and whatever he would need. And then I've also got everything we need for the ceremonies that we're doing at multiple different locations along the walk.
So she's meeting us in Maple Ridge with her son, and it'll be a 4-person commemoration ceremony. Well, I think everything that I've done is something that other people can do as well. And I was able to do these things, which I think are small things, but hopefully everything will add up to be a really great commemoration for remembrance.
And he also lit tribute candles and he laid poppy wreaths at cenotaphs and military armories across Metro Vancouver this morning. So special tribute. And that's it for us. I'm Vineet Brach. You're watching CBC News BC. Stay with us. We got more news updates. Up next is BC Today.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, today marks the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Ceremonies honoring the service and sacrifice of the brave soldiers who stormed the beaches of Normandy are taking place. Veterans are now in their 90s, even 100, making today's events all the more poignant. We'll take you through today's events in BC and beyond, and we're asking you on the open line, what does today's anniversary of D-Day mean to you? I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming. You can find us on the CBC News app or on YouTube. Just search for CBC Vancouver. You can call us now on our top story for today. What does the 80th anniversary of D-Day mean to you? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. If you'd like to email, our address is bctoday@cbc.ca. And veterans are being honored for their sacrifice and valor in ceremonies across the country for that fateful battle on the beaches of Normandy. And as we take your calls, we're going to hear from various guests throughout the hour as well. First joining me is retired Corporal Guy Black, a Canadian Forces veteran and Governor General Sovereign Medal recipient for his volunteer work. He's just completed an 80-kilometer memorial walk beginning yesterday from his home in Coquitlam to Vancouver. And now he's walked over to our studios, although I imagine that's not part of your itinerary.
But we did walk here.
You did walk here. Tell us about why you wanted to do this in the first place.
I wanted to do something different, unique, something hard to commemorate the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And after a while, I actually canceled the walk idea. And then I thought about it, and then I came back with it, and I thought I will honor World War II veterans that I actually knew. And so I commemorated 20 local veterans.
Well, you went to canceling it and back again. What happened there?
Well, usually when I come up with an idea for some sort of commemoration activity, I will say my idea to someone. And the reaction I want is, "You are crazy." And the reaction I got was very lackluster. So I thought, I'm not going to kill myself for lackluster sort of response. And then that's when I had the idea of, okay, it'll be myself and my son. It will be our act of remembrance for the veterans that I knew. That's why I did it.
20 people. So what was it like then for you? I can see you're getting a little bit emotional describing it now. What was going through your mind and what were you reflecting on as you were undertaking this walk?
The walk is something where you spend a lot of time in your own head. So you're thinking about stuff for 20 hours. And of course, I thought about all of these soldiers that have all since passed away. Some of them actually did not fight in like the D-Day battle, Normandy campaign and stuff, but they were World War II veterans. And it just brought back a lot of memories. And I think you have pictures of candlelight jars that I made. That it was actually sad for me to do that.
I'm sure, and I'm sorry for your losses of your friends.
Yeah.
Was it something that you talked about with them, their experiences, or was that difficult to broach?
What I found is that most veterans, war veterans, do not talk about it. Mm-hmm. And all the veterans that I knew, they generally did not talk about it. And if they ever did, it's going to be like a funny story or something. One of the guys, he lived in Coquitlam. His name is Ted Fletcher. And he was a crewman on a Canadian tank. And he had 4 tanks disabled in battle. And he told me that the last one, he was able to escape from his tank. The tank was on fire. He had shrapnel, pieces of metal in his body, especially his legs. And he was crawling back to Canadian lines. And he said, I raised up my hand and it was shot.
Oh my God.
So he was one of the guys that actually told me something that actually happened, not just a funny story. Mm-hmm. But I got to know him as well, and just amazing to know these people.
You know, it is, this particular anniversary is all the more meaningful because veterans are passing away and getting older. And, we heard from a minister today saying the Canadian government will continue to honor veterans even once the last one has passed, and that is going to be important. Why do you think it is so important?
Well, I think we have to remember, because it's one thing that I think about is like a friend of mine, Elizabeth McHardy, she lives in Maple Ridge. Her brother was killed in Korea in 1951. So he died as a young man, never had a chance to come home, never had a chance to start his own family, no wife, no children. And they lived with that their entire life. And they think about him every day. So that's why we need to remember, because you think about all these soldiers, servicemen and women that have died, they didn't have a chance to like have a life, to live a life.
So that others could.
Yes.
In peace.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the candles that you made, and you've left them at each of the stops. Can you tell us more about that? Because you put a lot of thought and effort into this.
I started out by just picking the Legion of Honor medal recipients. Those were the people that I was going to focus on. And then I thought, well, how can I go to the Port Moody cenotaph and not place candles for the others that I knew? And the other people have been forgotten. So that's how the number grew up to 20. But it was important for me to do something for them. And it was myself and my son.
Yes, you wanted to bring your son along. What was that like for you and for him?
It was a great experience. It provided so much help for me because it let me just walk and I didn't have to worry about anything. So tremendous amount of help. You should have someone with you. My original plan was that I would have a backpack and I would carry like a poppy wreath on my back and have maybe not 20 candles, but I have candles in my backpack. And then my son said he will come and support me.
Wow. And he's sitting just over there.
Yes.
Hi, thanks for coming. He's smiling and
one
nodding.
thing about my son Cameron, and I have another son, Sean, they both have the Minister of Veterans Affairs commendation. And they received it around 2016 when they were in high school.
Wow, what an honor. You're going off, you're spending are you spending the rest of the day doing other things as well?
Yeah, we've organized a ceremony at the Port Moody Legion for 6 p.m. So we will go home, rest, have something to eat, and then get dressed up and then go to the ceremony.
Okay. I really appreciate your joining us. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It really gets us into that space of thinking of people to honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome.
Very nice to have you with us. That's Guy Black, who has walked 80 kilometers in honor of D-Day and World War II veterans. It is 12:14 now Pacific time. Well, on June 6, 1944, Richard Norris was 17 years old. He was a fisherman reservist from Quadra Island, and on that historic day, Mr. Norris led the Allied charge on Juno Beach in Normandy. And today, 80 years later, he's lowering the flag at the Summerland Cenotaph. Richard Norris spoke to CBC's Chris Walker on Daybreak South this morning.
Yeah, do you know the whole invasion was scheduled for the 5th of June, but due to a full gale in the channel, it was changed. We returned to port and laid over until the weather boys told us that we had a 48-hour weather opening. And we said, let's go. So we went.
How scared were you on the trip over the channel?
I was amazed. I could hear the whole world was thumping and bumping. The fleet that went across with all the Aldous lamps flickering, and the Aldous lamps are lamps with a shutter on them that the boys on the ships could communicate with one another. Well, they were just blinking away like stars in the sky, but the whole area was just pulsating and thumping, and you could hear way off in the distance, you could hear the gunfire.
What are you looking forward to about today?
Well, I'm going to put the flag up, and I hope I can hold back a lot of feelings. Well, doing best. I remember the magnitude of that invasion when the whole channel was all moving in thunder. You could tell, you could hear the thump of the engines of ships. You could hear the rattle, and that every conveyance you can think of was floating by. You know, it was amazing.
I bet.
It was amazing.
The sound of bagpipes in Normandy earlier today as part of the commemorations to mark the D-Day landings 80 years ago. There are D-Day ceremonies today taking place across the country, as well as a Canadian commemoration event at Juno Beach and an international ceremony at Omaha Beach. And we're asking you, what does this 80th anniversary of D-Day mean to you? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Let's take our first caller now, and Roman is on the line from Port Alberni. Hi, Roman.
Hi, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. And what's on your mind today?
Well, first, a great big thank you to all who gave their all. And in particular, I really want to state that this day has a profound significance for me. As an Indigenous person who lives in this country of Canada, because I know of ancestors, grandparents that answered the call of duty, and at a time when they were not even considered to be Canadians, understood the importance of fighting for the sovereignty of a nation. And we're getting to a point today where we're in a much better place. But I wish and I hope for the strength, the spirit that they had to answer a call, grandfathers and grandmothers in all sorts of capacities that really, really profoundly impact me individually as a father and as a member of a nation and as a member of this country, because if we could all see the world the way we see it, I think a lot of the messes we make could be cleaned up quite readily and quite because it's much less selfish and much more balanced in understanding the humane approach to humanity.
Yeah. I take how meaningful this is to you, specifically as well, Roman. And, we often talk about the campaign to get Indigenous Veterans Day as well, and the role of Indigenous soldiers on D-Day is something that should be talked about as well. How do you have this conversation with your own family now in order to remember those great uncles?
Well, that point that I share with you is always the starting point. That if we cannot see beyond ourselves, all we'll see is we might as well walk around with a tiny little candle in a dark, long cave. We'll only see what's there in front of us, and we might not be going that direction, and we'll never know it. Sometimes we have to have faith in something that we can't see, and in faith in others that we may be afraid of, and reach out and understand this tenet that exists amongst my people. Hishuk Tsawak, everything is one. Hishuk Nish Tsawak, we are all one people. And finally, Hishukna Tsawatskwi, we are all one family. The blood runs red, and if we spill it, we must answer for that. So we make darn know what we're doing if that's the choice we're going to make. And I think it causes us to live more introspectively and understand that freedom doesn't just mean do whatever you want. It means being able to think freely with the respect of things that were given a very great loss, sometimes that being life. We forget that they might have had full trees had they been able to live past the war. They sacrificed all of that for all of us.
A very poignant reminder, Roman. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That is, bye-bye, Roman in Port Alberni. Dawn is on the line now in Vancouver. Dawn, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yes, I'm phoning just in my family. Remembrance Day of any kind is a big ceremony. I had 3 older brothers and an uncle who served in World War II. The oldest of my 2 older brothers actually died in 1967 of lead blood poisoning from all the shrapnel in his body. And the middle of my 2 older brothers, Ray Allison, actually landed on the beaches of Normandy. And the only story he tells, and he was the only brother who talked about, because most of them, the stories they had were just too hard to share with anybody. But one brother did, and he was landing on the beaches and stepped off the end of the landing craft and sank to the bottom because they were too far out. and somebody grabbed the back of his pack and put him up onto the edge of the thing. And to this day, he doesn't know if that person made it to the beach or if the person died or what. But yeah, our family Remembrance Day is always, of course, a really momentous day. Just one of the stories that one brother did share, even one of the stories he shared with me would be enough to traumatize most of us for life. Yeah, they had many, many stories like that. So it's a day for all of us to say thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are important stories to hear as well. My thanks to your brothers for their service, Don. Thank you for honoring them today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
That is Don in Vancouver, asking you, what does today's 80th anniversary of D-Day mean to you? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, D-Day, as it would become known, was the start of what was codenamed Operation Overlord, the Allied military endeavor that launched the liberation of Nazi-occupied Western Europe. Joining me now for the hour is David Zimmerman, a military history professor at the University of Victoria. Good afternoon to you, Professor.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for joining us. You heard our callers there talk about, their family members and honoring them. And you heard our first guest, a veteran himself, who was making sure to honor veterans he knew who had served in World War II. Why is it so important to hold these commemorations?
I think it's important to remember the sacrifices made by so many. Because really, although most of them went to the conflict not hoping to liberate Europe from the Nazis, but in the end product, that's what they accomplished. And they destroyed one of the most despicable regimes in history. And D-Day was a crucial moment of the eventual victory of the Allies over Germany in the Second World War.
Yes, and how significant was it in turning the tide in the war?
Well, it was very clear that if the war was going to be won, and despite some people claiming the Soviets really did it all themselves, it's really not true. And the only way the Western allies and the United States, Britain, and of course Canada is a major player in this, were going to help bring the war to an end was to attack in France and to move eastward through France, eventually into the Low Countries and then into Germany itself. So this was the beginning of a campaign that went on for nearly a year until finally Germany was forced to surrender. And without this momentous event of taking an army, and in the case of D-Day, on the very first day, 150,000 Allied soldiers were landed in France to gain a very narrow beachhead in France. And that was an extraordinary event, an incredible event of meticulous military planning, which accomplished something that many thought was absolutely impossible.
The largest amphibious invasion in history.
Absolutely. By far.
By far. Can you tell us about that mission itself, a bit more about that kind of planning, that gargantuan planning that was involved?
Well, let me just give you a couple of things about how carefully they planned. One of the things that they understood is when they got ashore, that was only the beginning of the battle. And the issue of how are you going to supply your troops? Well, first thing is they actually built a prefabricated undersea pipeline to carry gasoline. They actually built 2 prefabricated harbors so they could convert some of the beaches into actual harbors because they knew they weren't going to capture working harbors in France for maybe weeks or even months into the future. And a modern army depends on a vast amount of logistics and the supplies, all the munitions, everything else that they need to continue to fight and to bring in more men. So all of this was planned in advance. And if you go to France, you can still see the remains of these mulberry harbors, which made the invasion a success.
Wow, and 14,000 Canadians.
14,000 Canadians landed on the first day.
Yeah.
Many more were to follow. And, you know, there were 359 Canadian soldiers were killed on June 6th. But it's often forgotten this is just the first day. They campaigned just to defeat the Germans in Normandy, lasted until about the 20th of August. And there were many battles after D-Day where there were actually more Canadian casualties as the Canadians, with the British, pressed towards the French city of Caen. And then once Caen was captured, advanced to join with the Americans at Falaise in August 1944.
My guest is David Zimmerman, history professor at the University of Victoria. My guest for the hour as we commemorate the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And we're asking you, what does this anniversary mean to you? We're going to hear from some more veterans' voices coming up in our next half hour as well, and more of your calls on the open line. If you'd like to email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. And our phone lines are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone as well. We have an email here from Sandra who writes, "My late father lied about his age to serve in World War II. Fortunately, he was just sent to Edmonton to be an air traffic controller. My parents got a loan through the Veterans Land Act, or VLA, to buy our house way back." Sandra, thank you for that. And again, our email address is bctoday@cbc.ca. It's 12:30 now, and time for the CBC News with Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. There's been a slowing in the number of people dying in the current drug crisis. The BC Coroner Service says 182 people died of toxic drugs in April. That's a decrease of 24% compared to the same month last year. The man stabbed to death yesterday in Vancouver has been identified as a popular chef in Yaletown. 32-year-old Wataru Kakeuchi was stabbed on Union Street on the edge of Chinatown. Mayor Ken Sims says Kakeuchi was more than a talented chef. He was a positive presence and a cherished friend to many. There's no word on a possible motive or arrests. And there's still no sign of 3 mountaineers missing since Friday in Garibaldi Park outside Squamish. A break in the weather has allowed crews to search on foot and in the air today. However, conditions are difficult in the high Alpine, where rescuers are dealing with winter conditions and fog. And now the forecast on the north coast. Sunshine this afternoon with a high of 12. Highs reaching 19 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, some sun and cloud with a high of 16. Sunny in the Kootenays this afternoon with highs up to 24. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 25. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, some sun and cloud this afternoon with highs up to 21 degrees. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Rob. That's Robert Zimmerman in our CBC Vancouver newsroom. And welcome back here with BC Today here on CBC, live in your lunch hour on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming as well. But much more, of course, coming your way in the afternoon in your region on CBC Radio. And in Metro Vancouver, here's what's coming up on the Coast.
Hi, Michelle. Belpuri here, sitting in for Gloria Makarenko. This has probably been one of the busiest weeks in BC politics in a long time. Our Soapbox social team will be here to give us their take on the shifting lines between the BC political parties. As well, the federal government has announced a pilot to make it easier for some caregivers to get permanent residency. So we will meet a former caregiver from the Philippines who worked in Canada for 8 years before she could get her family to join her. We'll learn what these changes may mean for others. Join us at 3 o'clock on the Coast.
Thank you very much. Belpuri on the Coast this afternoon. And much more coming your way as well when it comes to D-Day coverage here on CBC, available live on CBC News Explore And the CBC News BC's streaming channel was earlier today at 1 a.m. There was a lot of coverage of D-Day ceremonies. And coming up as well at 1 p.m. our time, there will be radio coverage of Juno Beach and the ceremony there, hosted by John Northcott and Nala Ayed. Well, today is also about honoring that special group of surviving veterans back on Juno Beach 80 years later. Let's hear from some of them. Honorary Lieutenant General Richard Romer, Major Jim Parks, and Warrant Officer George Couture. And first, you'll hear Captain Bill Wilson.
The first thing we saw was the contrails of the superforts going in to drop bombs on the landing beaches. So that would be about 4 to 5 in the morning, and the sun would continue to rise.
So as you get closer to shore and it's your turn to go ashore, what was that like?
I was all nervous. I was all excited about this until the Germans opened fire, and then everything happened at once. It's just like a dream.
Was it slow like a dream?
No, fast. Everything was fast.
Our carriers got overflowed with water, and we had to swim. They always told you that when you hit the beach or something, there'd be 60% casualties. So you say, well, I'm going to be, that's 6 out of 10. I'm going to be one of the 4 that made it. I always thought of that. I'm going to be one of the 4.
I have 3 old pals who died that day, and it was really very extremely difficult for us who had to keep on fighting. And I keep pictures of all 3 of them. In fact, I have them on the walls of my office in my bedroom. All I can do is think of them from time to time, the pictures together with them, and think of how they died and what they died for.
The voices of surviving veterans remembering the events of D-Day. And we are asking you, what does this 80th anniversary of D-Day mean to you? Our numbers again are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can hit pound 690 on your phone or email bctoday@cbc.ca. John is calling us from Gold River. Hi, John. Hi there, John. Can you hear me? Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, no, I just wanted to emphasize the importance of June 6th to our Canadians so they can realize just how important our freedom and liberties are all related to that day. And my parents were both in the war. They were in the RAF. They weren't at D-Day. But they always used to speak about how important D-Day was and how they used to always celebrate it at the Legion. All their friends would have memorials about D-Day.
What do you think people should be thinking about today?
The sacrifices the men and women made on that day, how important it is again to this day right now that I'm sitting here enjoying my liberty and my freedoms. I would hate to see the younger generations forget that, just how important it is.
Yeah, and you used to work in a school, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. What was your sense of young people's understanding, or what was needed to ensure that awareness is there and present?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's dying out. I don't think you ask most children; they don't really know anything about it, and so I think it needs to be emphasized and taught more. But this cannot be taken for granted, our freedom and liberty, especially in today's world.
John, great to hear from you. Thanks for calling.
Thanks for taking my call. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Anne is next in Langley. Hi, Anne.
Hi.
Hi. What are your thoughts today?
Well, I was 14 when the war ended. I remember being in school, and my teacher was the principal, and he went he excused himself for a minute, went into his office, and on the loudspeaker he announced the war was ended, and one of the boys jumped out of the window. But we all got out, and we went and got on our bikes and rode around town. I was living in Sudbury, Ontario at the time. And and I had one brother-in-law in the Air Force and one brother-in-law in the Navy.
Wow. And so what did it
They're
feel
all
like?
gone now, of course, but because I was younger, and I also remember the day the war started. Radio. We didn't have electricity, and I guess our radio in the house was dead. And as I came, my mother was sitting there crying and saying, "We are at war."
Oh. Did you understand that at the time?
Oh, yes, I was 8 years old.
Yeah.
And we had been hearing about it. And just earlier, we'd had the King and Queen come and visit to Ontario, and we drove to Sudbury, and they came to the park and rode by. I remember that.
You remember a lot, yeah.
Yeah, well, my mind's still fine.
Yeah.
Anyway, the war at this day always brings back memories of the war and my family.
Yeah. Was it? Can I ask you, Anne? What was it like having your brothers away during that time for you?
My brother-in-laws. Well, they lived in Toronto, so I didn't see them that much. But it was hard on my sister, especially the one in the Navy, because her husband would come home periodically. And then he would go, and I thought later it really must have been hard because she never knew whether his ship would be sunk or not when he was away. And my other brother-in-law was in the Air Force, and he went overseas, and he was there a long time. He didn't come home till a year after the war was over.
Wow. And that image that you just told us, and you started off with, that the teacher making the announcement the war is over, and just that jubilation, and one of the boys jumped out the window.
Yeah. We all laughed, but none of us followed until the teacher came back and he told us that school was over. And, of course, we all rushed out.
Yeah.
Because the war was over, we were cheering and on our bikes. And it was that I remember. And
a day in history, yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So every year when this day comes around, I think about that.
Yeah.
That was my memories.
Really glad you shared it, Anne. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Anne in Langley. Doug is up next now in Kelowna. Hi, Doug. Thanks for calling.
Thank you for taking my call. It's, I don't know, I just heard your program, and it's such an emotional day today. I had an uncle who was in the Army, and I had a dear friend who was in World War II, who I brought out with me several years ago when I moved here to West Kelowna, and he was a World War II vet, and he lied to get into the war. He was 16, and he lied and said he was 18 and got in, and he was over there, and he was over for 2 weeks, and he got hit by a German tank, and the hatch came down on his hand and chopped off his 3 left fingers. And they took him to hospital, and they said, "We're going to send you home, kid." He said, "I'm not going home." And they put him driving a truck to haul him back and forth, supplying supplies the next year.
Wow.
Anyways, I lied a couple of years ago. And, I'm just so grateful I'm 71 years old, and I'm just so grateful to be in this country because, you think about what's going on in the world today, and people in Gaza and people in Ukraine, not knowing if they're going to wake up in the morning or if their children are going to be killed or their buildings are going to be exploded. We are in such an amazing country where we can do anything we want, anytime we want, with no restrictions and be anything we want. That's the opportunity that these people gave us 80 years ago. They gave us this freedom. They gave us this life. And I'm forever grateful for them. I honestly don't know if we would have the people today who would be going over there at 18 years old. I know there's some of them, but I'm just talking generally, the way things that have changed in society. I'm just so blessed to have the life we have and what they've provided for us, and I'll be eternally grateful. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your time. That's Doug in Kelowna with a very clear call for gratitude there. Let's take one more call before I go back to my guest here, Tamara in Chetwynd. Thanks for calling.
Hi there.
Hi. And what does this anniversary mean to you? 80th anniversary of D-Day.
Well, just a little backstory on. I was actually homeschooled. I grew up in a tree about the war, none. And I'm 42 years old. And this week, I mean, of course, throughout my life, I learned some things. But through the last week, there was some television programs on about D-Day and, the background of World War II. And I was mesmerized. And I was Googling and I was trying to learn some more. And the interviews with some of the veterans that they lost good friends. There was a fellow that you just interviewed there. It was very similar where, he still had pictures of these guys and they were his good friends he had gone to school with. And they were all so young when they went, to do this thing that must have just felt nearly impossible. And learning about kind of some of the history, like mostly what struck me is that like for the veterans, they've carried this their entire lives and they came back and they carried on, they got jobs, they raised families, and in today's society that's something that I think a lot of us can't even fathom is to continue like that. But the one thing that kind of struck me when I was learning a bit about the history of World War II, which I'm learning late, but it is what it is that the background of how it all happened, like for example, Hitler was Man of the Year, People's Man of the Year, and I think it was 1933, don't quote me. The Nazis were considered very forward-thinking and progressive and all these things, and it sort of snowballed and, became a monster that got out of control. And I just think, like, what can we do in the future so that this doesn't happen again? Because the one thing that they all said, the veterans, a lot of them, was that, war is such a terrible thing and that it got to that point, So I think Canada, like the one thing that I gathered is that, we have since World War II, we have a really strong kind of peacekeeping missions and intervening human rights issues before things get to that point, like that balance and check. And I think that I'm way more proud than ever to say I'm Canadian after learning some of this stuff.
Well, I commend you for learning so much, after learning that you hadn't learned the history of World War II, Tamara. Thank you so much for being, for eloquently summarizing what you have learned and your reflections on it. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's Tamara in Chetwynd. I'll go back to my guest here, David Zimmerman, military history professor at UVic. I can see you taking notes actually over our Zoom connection here. I mean, what's going through your mind hearing these personal stories from people speaking of their families who served and just their general reflections of the impact of the service and sacrifice of soldiers on D-Day and afterwards?
Well, what I think is of crucial importance is right now, almost all of the veterans of the Second World War are gone. And it's how we're going to preserve the memory of what they achieved. And there's various ways we can do that. In my course on the Second World War, my students researched the life of an individual soldier who died in the Normandy campaign. And there's all sorts of now documents available online to enable them to do so. And just to get these young people to actually research and write about someone their own age who didn't live to be 25 because they paid the ultimate sacrifice. And I think we're not doing enough of this. And unfortunately at UVic, when I retire in 2 years, it won't be taught anymore at UVic. And in the high schools as well, we're simply not preserving the memories and having students understand the sacrifices that were made. And I think part of the problems we're in now are a reflection of people forgetting about how these liberties were fought for to preserve them. And then we have people using political violence in Canada to achieve goals. It's absolutely frightening. And this is simply disrespect for what the veterans sacrificed, those that didn't come back. in the Second World War.
What needs to happen then? I mean, here you are, one example, right, at UVic. It sounds like you don't have a successor to teach this course. You talked about high schools. I have kids in high school, and I know that they read books, during their English class and things like that. But how do we push that further, that awareness?
Well, I mean, in high schools, I'm well aware there's all sorts of pressures on the curriculum. But I think, unfortunately, the role of history in British Columbia high schools have been pushed into the background in many ways. And understanding these events and putting them in perspective. And a lot of the current political discourse is based on fundamental ignorance, which is extraordinary to me as someone who is a historian, who has spent his entire life learning about the past, of how we are completely ignorant of the past. And one of the things we've done at the University of Victoria, we have the Veterans Oral History Collection. I teach another course where students interview veterans and their recollections are preserved and are put online through the UVic's library special collections, and anybody can listen to them. These are in-depth interviews of usually 90 minutes in length with veterans. We haven't done Second World War veterans for a while because simply they got too old, and then there weren't enough of them to be interviewed. Now we're doing people that served in peacekeeping missions or served in Afghanistan or in Bosnia. And I think it's really important to understand what members of the armed forces have given in order to ensure that we continue to enjoy the liberties that we have in Canada.
Yeah, let's take some more calls. That important awareness and education of history. Thanks very much for pointing that out. Harry is joining us now from Vancouver. Hi, Harry.
Hi. Hello.
Thanks for calling. What does this anniversary of D-Day mean to you?
Well, if it wasn't for D-Day, I wouldn't be here at all. My parents were both survivors of the Holocaust. They were in concentration camps. Hello?
Yes, I'm listening. Oh my goodness. I mean, this is the worst of the experiences of World War II.
They never talked about it ever. It was just the way it was.
Yeah.
Yes, I totally wouldn't be here at all. Lots of people wouldn't be here.
Harry, I don't know how much you're comfortable sharing, but when you think about today, then what thoughts are brought to your mind?
Well, like I said, I'm sorry for the people that died, but they're just heroes, totally heroes. They sacrificed their lives for the freedom of everybody.
What would you like people to think about?
I think they should think about what's happening in the world. If you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And the way it's going, it's just scary. I don't care about myself. I'm retired, I'm old and stuff. But my kid, I have a daughter. And I worry about her.
And do you talk to her about your experience and what your parents went through?
No, it's hard to, and
I'm sure.
I don't think she could understand. She never had grandparents, right? My parents died way before she was there. I wish we could have known them.
You have the personal experience of the importance of D-Day, Harry. Thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, and thank you, guys. I really appreciate everything you guys do.
We appreciate your calling. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
David, thank you so much for your call. Really appreciate it. Let's take another call here now. David in Nanaimo, and I do note just how emotional all of these calls are. I appreciate people sharing their own family histories and their thoughts and very powerful reflections on this day. Thank you. David in Nanaimo, hello.
Hello.
What would you like to say?
Yeah, I'd like to share the memory of when I was 8 years old. After D-Day is very important to me. It's the turning around of the war for us. We've been bombed out a couple of times, and so very aware of the war.
You were in London.
I was, we were living south of London, very close to the countryside, and every afternoon after school, I would take my mother's dog for a walk in the hills. These were forested hills. And then one day in early May, I went up there, and there were American tanks under the trees. And the soldiers were so welcoming, and they fed me candy, which was highly rationed in England. So this was child's paradise. And got inside the tanks, and, it was a wonderful time. And then one day, early June, the tanks had all gone. And I only realized later I had no idea what happened to those men. And it's deeply meaningful to me that so many young people went to war on our behalf. Yeah. So that was the memory.
Wow. Was that something that, when you came to Canada, was on your mind as well?
Oh, it stayed with me every year. Every year.
I hear it in your voice, David.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the call.
You're very welcome. Bye.
Bye-bye. Our last caller today is Rob in Vancouver. Hi, Rob.
Hi.
Thanks so much for calling. And what made you want to call today?
Well, I'm watching your program, and I'm seeing you're over in the area. I was at Juno Beach about 8 years ago. My mom took us over there. My dad was in the war. He's not around anymore. But my mom took us there, and we were at Juno Beach, and they have the Canadian Pavilion there. And I went in there thinking nothing. And but as you go through the pavilion, you go in a room that it's got screens all around you, and it's that you're in the middle of a landing craft. And this landing craft's coming into the beach, and it's havoc in there. But those people, the boys, soldiered on. They opened the door. It was crazy.
That's what you were thinking of.
They opened the door, and, the machine guns are on them, trained on them. And the distance, is unbelievable how close they are to live machine guns.
Yeah.
And then after that, you get out of that projector room and you go walk on the beach, right like you were there yourself. And it just takes your breath away.
Rob, what a real education for you, right? 8 years ago, visiting Juno Beach and the Canadian Pavilion there. That's Rob in Vancouver. Thank you so much for calling. And David Zimmerman, this is what you were talking about, that sort of that connection to what people must have experienced and the soldiers must have experienced then.
Yeah, it's extraordinary to go to the Juno Beach Center. I think it should be a point of pilgrimage for any Canadian that can get over to Europe and to see the physical features, the nature of the battlefield, to visit some of the major cemeteries, particularly, of course, the Canadian, which are often ignored. There's a huge crowds at the American cemeteries, not at the Canadian. And so we really need to remember these people, and there's a whole variety of ways that we can do so. But I personally feel the most important thing we can do is to find individuals we have a personal connection to. And this is what a lot of the callers have talked about, this personal connection. And you can make those personal connections. My wife and I went to Juno Beach. We didn't know anyone who had died there. But one of my wife's colleagues, her grandfather had died there.
Oh.
She never knew it. And we went to his grave and we visited it and we left flowers and we took pictures. And then on the Juno Beach Center, there's a scrolling electronic screen where the list of all the Canadians that died.
I can imagine.
And we waited till this man's name appeared just so we could take a picture of it. And it's so moving. And
I bet.
Even you can find ways to remember people.
I hope that they go to your school's website to do that and listen to our show as well. Thank you so much for your time, Professor.